It's hard. It is. All right, I think we're ready to go. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm Wendy Garlock, Chair of the CFS, and I'm calling the meeting to order. Good morning, all. The first item will be the review of the agenda. Does anyone have any comments on the agenda? I have one comment, which is our annual report preparation will be taking place this summer. So I suggest that during our roundtable, we present some ideas as we've done in the past, where we talk about the annual report, usually sort of a summary of what we've done this year, our priorities, and what we expect to carry into next year. So during this meeting, if you can sort of think about that a little bit, we can flesh out during the roundtable what we want to cover in the report. And then in past years, I've done a rough draft and we've just commented on it, facilitating that. And we can talk in the roundtable about that more. So that's my comment on the agenda. Not seeing others. Welcome, Amanda. We'll do roll call. Heather, could you do that first? Thanks. Amanda Sullivan-Astor here. David Budney.
Present by video.
Gary Jensen.
There.
Glenn Ahrens.
Here.
Jake Ryan.
Here.
Julie Woodward.
Here on video.
Viola Swanson.
Here on video.
Kate McMichael here. Mauricio Valerio.
Here on video.
And Wendy Gerlach. Here in person. Thank you. We have next is comments on the prior meeting summary, which Heather sent around. Does anyone have any comments on that? Seeing none, that's good as it is. The next item is public comment. Does anyone, any members of the public on and want to introduce themselves? I think we have a member of the public present. I'm Teresa. I'm a member of the public. Thank you for being here. The next item is chair updates. Well, our first update is I want to thank Jake for being here. Jake Ryan of Interfor, who has is an industry representative on the committee and was formally voted on recently by the Board of Forestry. So thank you so much. You have a word you want to say, or you don't have to.
No, I appreciate the introduction. Happy to be here. Happy to be a part of this.
Thank you. And then we have some presenters here today also. So Gordon Culberson, thanks for being here. Being presenting later, and also Jeff Gersh also presenting later. So thank you both for being here, and you can do a little intro of yourselves when you come to your presentation, if that works for you. I wanted to mention also, I think this is Keola's last meeting, because Keola has been a really helpful and productive committee member for a long time. I think you've filled two 3-year terms. So Keola, I want to just thank you for being on the committee and give you this little opportunity if you want to say anything about any last meeting comments.
Oh, thanks, Wendy. I'm sorry not to be there in person with you all. It did get harder to be in Salem when I moved to Bend, but always have just really appreciated this committee, the opportunity to learn from each of you and to be coordinated with the agency. And Wendy, I feel like I think you came on sometime during my first term. I don't know how long you've been on the committee, but however long, you've really, I think, shifted the direction and tried to, sort of re-engage in a proactive way that I find, really useful and exciting. And I think the agenda today is, just feels like there's some good momentum, and I'm really excited to hear from Jeff, and hope that he will be joining the committee eventually. Also to coordinate with Gordon and Nils. I think just the topics are really pertinent. So thanks for all of the work that you've done, and for everyone on the committee. I mean, you all do really important work, and I hope we'll still cross paths in the woods or in small forest owners, family forest owner kind of spaces.
Well, thanks, Keola, and we'll enjoy, we'll see more of you during this meeting at a round table too. So you're not gone yet. But I wanted to take that time to thank you and thank our presenters again, and just everyone for being here today. That's it for my updates. I will pass it over to Mike.
Great. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. It seems like it's been forever since we met. That's just So I was trying to reflect back to our last meeting. I think it was in January, actually.
Yeah.
Where is that? Okay. So there has been a lot going on with the Oregon Department of Forestry. We have legislature going on. We have an interim state forester, Kate, who's doing a fantastic job. Want to touch on the legislature a little bit first here, but I did want to say, at least within our division, there hasn't been any personnel changes, which is pretty nice for us. It's we can actually keep moving forward with all the work that we have to do. So, kind of first time in almost a year or so, we haven't had any personnel changes. So that's good. I want to talk about, there's a few things going around. I'll get to the legislature bits and pieces here in a bit, but there's some executive orders that have been going around from the federal government that kind of lands in my desk a bit, but I have to kind of evaluate, take a look at some of those. As far as I know right now, we're kind of holding steady with the executive orders. We're meeting with our counterparts in the Forest Service and NRCS, trying to see exactly how this is going to affect small executive orders and the other partners as well. So we're planning for those. I know with our federal forest restoration GNA, that's one that's going to be, well, it's not May, it is in one of the executive orders to increase the GNA work on federal forest land. So we're watching that closely to see how it ramp up, ramp that up, ramp down, faster. In fact, he was just presenting at our all employees meeting about Council of Western State Foresters GNA. I think the unit that met was it Springfield?
It was here in Salem.
It's here in Salem.
I presented there.
Okay. To talk about the GNA and the work that's kind of could potentially increase here. So a lot of it's going on. I want to touch briefly on a few other things. Forest Service, for a while there, it was kind of hit and miss whether or not they were signing new agreements, specifically some of the ones around like Emergency Forest Restoration Program, which is used for ice storms, fire dams, and everything. I've seen a positive movement, I guess, in the right direction that some of those agreements will be put in place. Hopefully those will continue to move forward. Natural Resource Conservation Service helps with a lot of the kind of the fire mitigation, fire prep, the landscape resiliency type of work. We are going to meet with them on Thursday with my counterparts on NRCS to talk about we have a statewide agreement that we do work between us and them, ODF and them, and NRCS to try and get that in a good place and signed moving forward. And then we have some RCPPs, Regional Conservation Project proposals, I think those are, trying to see where those are. So there's a bit of stall there with the NRCS for a while. So we're going to meet with them on Thursday to try and get some of that moving forward. A lot of that work is done in Eastern Oregon. There's some of that that's done here in Western Oregon as well. So part of that, that's kind of it for partners. Fire season is here. We already had 3 fires already, I think, which is kind of early for us. Luckily, we've caught them and kind of bedded down. You don't really want early season fires on landscape because then you have to watch them the rest of the summer. So that's something a lot of people don't realize. They actually have to commit at least a crew to go out and check the results and make sure they don't pop back up to them. So we've got, I think everybody, I was just talking to Jake here, I think everybody's gone on the fire season, should check, except from the Northwest. They're either there close to going on the fire season. All the crews are on, hired. They're going through fire school this week and next week. So all the crews should be ready. Actually, should be ready by next week. So, the legislation, I heard that James gave Short, sorry, James. Feels like Friday. James Short gave an update. We've got we saw no reductions in our media budget. So we're at current service level, which is good. For the first time in a while, we have not. It's nice to have a current service. Kind of move on with the current programs you have. It's just a couple of the Senate bills that we were kind of tracking. Obviously, the Senate Bill 1051, which is the appointing of the state forester by the governor. I've heard that it passed, but then I heard it didn't pass, and that's in the Senate, I think, or the House. So it's still moving around from there. So I haven't heard where that's at yet. Kate Skinner.
That's the Senate, but it's going to be up today for the House.
The House, no, yeah. So Kate Skinner got on this morning. She says, whichever direction it goes, whoever's hired, we will support the new state. She's committed to that. And the other one is the fire 3940, which I believe is in the Senate tomorrow. If I remember correctly.
Today, well, it's up for a work session today.
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
I'm looking at all this right now.
Thank you. Thanks. So
I'm
anyway,
like, I'm posing as Derek.
yeah. And then for those that haven't heard, 83 passed, which got rid of the wildfire reduction. A few other things. I think that's all I have for now. And then we can talk about the presentation later. Oh, one other thing, you may want to talk about roundtable as well, since Gordon's here, is the new representative for Osborne, because Rick Zen retired. For those who don't know, Mike Caffreda, Mike Caffreda will be the new director for Oswald. I didn't have him come to this meeting yet because he's technically still working for the state. So next meeting, I'll try and get him here as the Oswald representative. So,
That's wonderful. Very, very glad that Mike is going to be on board here.
he's already
For 2 weeks.
Yeah, he cornered me at the Board of Forestry and he's asked me, so what's going on with CFF? What do you need? So he said, I think I gave him 5 things for it. Yeah.
Mike, I have a question for you. When you talk about your relationships with the Forest Service, does the state still have the relationship where they could manage timber sales and take over management obligations on districts?
That's our federal forest restoration G&A program. So Kyle Master is, yes.
That's still going. We haven't lost the budget.
No, that's one they're increasing. That's the one the executive order would like to increase it by another, I want to say another 25-30%. As far as that, it's like they want to do on 900 million board feet.
Oh, good.
So yeah,
He has history of that.
that one's still moving forward. I think part of it is trying to figure out who's going to go do what, where, and so which I think Kyle was talking about. I think at that meeting he had, or they were talking about even sharing. I think he talked about again around the interstate agreements, state to state agreements. Sorry, where they can share kind of their workforce and their expertise across state lines. So like if we're missing somebody who knows about archaeology, maybe borrow Washington's archaeologists from White's, and vice versa for 2% lands. Yeah.
So states to state, but within region.
So within the western states, so the 16 states.
Okay, so it would be across different regions as well, or service regions.
Could be,
Because region 6 is just Oregon and Washington.
yeah.
But if it's more than that.
Well, it seems the state to state says, as far as I know, maybe it's just between us and Washington right now. I don't know. That's the first I heard that.
Yes.
Which is good. I think it's a good move. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a good idea to share some of that. Oh, and then we're waiting on the Christmas tree bill, which has a lot of fun. Which I think will be done. Well, it has to be done.
Thank you, Mike. Our next speaker is Gordon Culbertson. We're lucky enough to have here. I can tell just from standing by the coffee station, you are very knowledgeable. So,
Good coffee and cookies.
yeah, this is a good treat for this meeting. Anyway, I'll hand it over to you and thank you again for being here to talk about
Okay.
bill infrastructure.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Heather, how do we want to do this to advance the presentation?
I will give you the mouse and chess.
Okay. Well, I will introduce myself then while we're waiting. My name is Gordon Culbertson, and I have been involved in forestry in Oregon and some surrounding states for quite some time. I am a family owns tree farms in Lane and Douglas County, and I'm the current president of the Oregon Small Woodlands Association. My career started in 1973, working as a logger out in the Coast Range west of Oregon. And then for the better part of 3 decades after that, I managed timber operations for family-owned mill companies in Western Oregon. And in 2005, I retired from that and was kind of deciding how I was going to take life easy when I was hired to do a 2-week project for a company named Forest to Market. And they're a well-known company headquartered in Charlotte who are advisors and provide a lot of information on wood raw materials, supply chain, and pricing. And 17 years later, I still work for them. Only part-time now. But anyway, with that, I'd like to share with you today about timber supply and Oregon's mill infrastructure. And so let's go into that. Let's see, left click or right click to advance?
It should be left click.
Left click, okay.
Gordon, how would you like to handle questions? Would you like people just to sort of speak up, or would you like to wait to the end, or do you want to sort of pause and say questions now? What would you like to do?
You know, typically I kind of like to wait till the end so we can kind of have a discussion.
Okay,
But if someone has something that you don't understand or really is a burning question, it's not going to hurt my feelings. But I think to do it in as we go. But I would like, I think, generally just to have a discussion at the end.
sounds good. Okay.
Okay. Oregon has a really robust small forest owner system. And about 12% of Oregon's forests are owned by small woodlanders. And typically, we supply about 11% of the harvest. Of private lands, about a third of private forest lands in Oregon are owned by small forest owners. And typically, our forests are a little older and are generally managed on a longer rotation. And we produce really pretty high quality logs generally. And then also we provide a lot of amenities that are beneficial to the state. When get into clean water, wildlife habitat, and just generally small woodland owners are down in that low elevation area where we're your neighbor. Oregon, about 60% of our forest land is federal. And it generally supplies about 13% of the harvest. In the early 1990s, the Northwest Forest Plan was adopted, and that reduced harvests on the federal forests by about 90%. And in the process of making that management change, tens of thousands of jobs were sacrificed. And it had a very profound impact on many of our rural communities and the families that live there. The purpose of the Northwest Forest Land was to provide some predictability in timber harvest and at the same time protecting old growth habitat. Unfortunately, the 30 years since the Northwest Forest Plan was adopted has not been particularly successful at either of those. And we have presently a forest health crisis on a federal forest. And we're actually burning hundreds of thousands of acres of the old growth habitat that we were designed to protect. And a lot of that is just because of neglect in the forest, the road infrastructure, the forest health, and it's a serious crisis. Many mills in Oregon rely on federal and state stumpage sales. Currently, public timber sale programs contribute about 800 million board feet a year to the log supply. Timber sales are sold at a competitive public auction where there will be a prospectus that tells what the timber sale is, what the date is that it will be sold, and prospective bidders will show up to competitively bid. Sales are for a predetermined period, and the buyer arranges for logging and delivery. The active management of public forests, it improves forest health, it expands road access for fire, emergencies, and generally improves our wildfire hazard conditions on the forest. The stumpage sales provide much needed supply for local mills, typically above average family wage employment, funding for county services, and then, of course, very desirable sustainable building products. About 3/4 of timber harvest comes from private lands. About 40% of the private logs used at mills are harvested and delivered from company-owned forest lands, or what sometimes are known as fee lands. 40% of private logs that are delivered to the mills come from industrial timber companies and timber management organizations, or REITs, that don't have sufficient mill capacity to use those logs. And then small woodland owners typically supply from 10 to 15% of the total harvest. The last numbers I had were 11, but over a period of a decade, they'll vary a bit. These logs are known as open market logs, and they're purchased under sales agreements or purchase orders that define the price, the species, the quality, and the delivery specifications over a specified period of time. If you look at the log supply in Oregon, currently we're cutting about 3 billion board feet a year. And the last number that we have from this, there. Oh, it doesn't work on that. See, I'm an old school guy that has a pointer. The last numbers on the chart are from 2023, but the 2024 numbers are about the same, about 3 billion board feet, and it looks like we may be modestly higher than that in 2025. Yeah, there you go. There you go. And if you look at the 3 billion board feet, those numbers are very comparable to what we had in the 3 years of recession from 2008, 2009, 2010. And one thing of note is the 2009 harvest level at down about 2.7 board feet was the lowest number since 1934. So we have seen significant reductions in timber harvest over that period of time. Oregon has about 50 large-scale mills cutting mostly Douglas fir and hemlock. And of those, there are about 10 veneer mills, 10 veneer and plywood mills, and about 40 lumber mills. And in addition to that, there are 2 cedar mills and there are 2 hardwood mills. Now, these are large-scale commercial operations. There are many small mills that, while they're important, they really use a pretty small volume, sell a lot of their lumber bulk. The mills are really concentrated in the Willamette Valley, the Eugene Springfield area, the Roseburg area, and then up the valley on both sides. And then in Eastern Oregon, we've had a lot of degradation of the mill infrastructure, and the mills there are hundreds of miles north now. If you go up to Northeast Oregon, there is a concentration of a few mills up there. And so our pine industry is much, much smaller in Oregon than it once was. Oregon mills have a current log capacity of about 3.5 billion board feet, and about 90% of that is west of the Cascades. And again, those very large mills are concentrated in Douglas County, in the Eugene, Springfield, Lane County area, and then again up the either side of the valley. And then again, the largest mills in east of the mountains are spaced very far apart.
Gordon, I've just got a
Yes.
quick clarifying question on that last slide.
Mhm.
For current capacity, is that at current employment rates, or is that, if they had a swing shift and more shifts on, they could get up to that, or? What is that
That is the
equal?
capacity, but we're
Okay.
going to saw quite a lot less than that this year.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that, but again, is that at full employment? Is that, if we
That
increase
would be-
employment?
That would be roughly full employment. You never have probably 100% of the mill run rate,
Mhm.
but I think typically right now, we're probably looking at full capacity is, we're about 80%, 75 or 80% full capacity.
Okay.
Okay, here's a slide that for some reason. Well, how about that? This slide had an overlay of some information on it. For some reason, did not come through, and I don't know exactly. That may be a problem later on. I don't know just why it did that. What this chart shows is that from back in 2012 up through the current period, kind of the ebb and flow of Douglas fir log prices in Southwest Oregon. And this is price per thousand. It shows that in 2012, we were really just coming out of the recession, and prices for logs and prices for building materials were rising pretty quickly. And one of the part that for some reason doesn't show here was that it demonstrated that we have these peaks that show up pretty much annually. If you go back over many years, they are peaks in the period of time in the late winter and early spring months. Log prices go up. It's based on supply and demand, and the fact that in the winter months, logs from private lands oftentimes are difficult to source. This is one of the reasons why stumpage sales are so important. The stumpage sales that are on our public forests are areas that have well-developed road systems that are suitable for all-season hauling, where a lot of private forest owners don't have all-season roads. So typically, the log prices become more competitive during these periods of time in the winter months. Unfortunately, small woodland owners, a lot of times, because of the fact they don't have all-season roads, typically end up selling in these lower periods. And that's because of the fact that they're not able to access their timber. Some are. For instance, every time we cut timber, we invest some of that in rock roads, which is a prudent thing to do. It allows us to take advantage of these higher prices, or at least on the shoulder side, these higher prices. But as I started to say, what happens is small woodland owners oftentimes sell in these lower periods during the dry months, and they'll end up with taking a lower return on their logs, and they pay higher costs for trucking and logging because it's a very competitive market during that period. I think one of the things to note too is the highest log prices we have ever seen were in 22, and those prices carried over well into the summer months, which was kind of unusual during that period of time. But everyone was running at 100% capacity or as near a capacity because lumber prices were so high. Lumber and panel prices were so high. And then from that, though, the typical nature of the product prices went down to much more lower levels following that. Oregon is the leader in lumber production in the U.S. at about 14%. And you can see that lumber production has declined, and I anticipate will probably decline a bit more. Some of that's tied to log supply, and then some of it is tied to the fact that the southern states are becoming the leading lumber producing area in America. And that's primarily because of the abundance of raw material that's lower cost. It's very difficult for us to compete with southern pine.
Gordon,
Yes.
so this kind of ties into my previous question. This seems to indicate that we have a capacity of 5 billion board feet, but your previous slide said 3.5 billion.
Log scale.
Okay,
3.5 log scale.
gotcha.
Yeah.
That's helpful information, I think, because it can be confusing, you just.
Well,
can't
yeah,
let
it
people
can
board
be.
feet, right?
You figure just a good number for log scale and converting, would be 2 times.
That's helpful.
And here's the part that makes that make sense.
Mhm,
Is the fact that then there's plywood,
mhm.
that we have a production capacity of about a little over 2 million square feet, 3/8 of plywood in Oregon. And we are the largest plywood producer by a pretty substantial amount. And if you look at the percentage of logs that goes into plywood, it's about 20%. And that's going to be the vast majority of that is Douglas fir, but there's also Sitka spruce, hem fir, and a little bit of ponderosa pine included in that. And if the conversion, all the numbers where I convert back to, for instance, those production numbers, I converted 3/8 square feet back to board feet, just so we're all kind of on the same page there. Douglas fir is really the premier species for engineered wood, and Oregon has a real advantage in the fact that we have a lot of really creative and very efficient and modern engineered wood facilities that are in either have been running for a number of years and have consistently upgraded, or they are new facilities. And in the case of Blue Lamb, CLT, those products are made out of laminating lumber together. And same thing with I-joists and with structural composite lumber. Those are from laminating veneer together. And so we use both veneer that's been peeled and solid sawn lumber for that product. And again, for small woodland owners, the high quality logs that we have are very suitable and will bring a premium price to these products. Oregon lumber mills are really specialized, and they become much more so, and they buy logs according to their specific demand and what is the most profitable for them. Douglas fir makes up about 81% of lumber production in Oregon. Products are green and kiln-dried dimension, studs, and timbers. Many mills now buy logs on a matrix where they pay prices based on preferred lengths and diameters. The typical highly modernized and automated mills, it's pretty common that most of them have a maximum butt diameter of about 24 inches. And that is simply based on the size of the debar. And the reason that they choose that is those are the logs that run through the mill most efficiently. There are mills that have a variety of different butt sizes that they take based on the kind of products that they make. But if you look at just up and down the valley, the real high-speed automated dimension mill, that's typically their maximum butt. And a lot of times they prefer to keep their minimum size in that type of a mill at about 8 inches. They will take smaller logs, but oftentimes they have a differentiation in price. And those 6 and 7 inch logs, maybe, not always, but maybe discounted $25 or $50 a thousand. This smaller log, this 4 to 7, is directed to chip and saw operations, very highly automated facilities that they're cutting stud lumber, and then the outside or what's unsuitable is chipped for paper chips. The mills that are sawing those bigger butts, typically that equates to about a 16-inch scale diameter, are a lot of times logs or mills that specialize in cutting timbers, specialty products, and in some cases, high value wide dimension. Hem fir is about 15% of the production. Virtually all of it is kiln dried dimension and studs. And then pine lumber, as we said, that market, the people buying pine in Oregon, the number of mills has diminished greatly over the last couple of decades. And now it is it's less than 5% of the total mill production. Typically goes into paneling, dimension, millwork, and boards, traditional pine products. One chart that I wanted to throw in, and I think has a lot of influence on small woodland owners. This chart shows, based on your round trip haul distance, and being from 10 miles up to, I think I stopped. Did I go over 200? Can't tell. And then the haul cost that is associated per load. And this is based on just a typical long logger at $125 and a 4,000 board foot load. But it shows that when you're very close to the mill, that you're going to have a haul cost of $50 or less. And as you get out where you're hauling long ways, in excess of 100 miles, your hauling cost can end up being close to $200. What makes this really important is that, particularly with low value material, like small ponderosa pine, like they have in Eastern Oregon, it's not uncommon that the cost of harvesting and hauling that small ponderosa pine to the sawmill can exceed the value of the logs. And it is very tough for small forest owners in Eastern Oregon now to be able to manage their land just because the sawmill infrastructure is so depleted. And it's really important that for small woodland owners on the west side, that we maintain a viable mill infrastructure. There are times that we have, it's difficult sometimes to even sell some of the logs that we have. For instance, Sitka spruce is one that is difficult to sell. We own some Sitka spruce, and we are challenged sometimes to sell those logs. One of the markets for the coastal hem fir and Sitka spruce that we've used at times is the export market to China. And that's been important for us sometimes on some logs that we just did not have home for. And so we cut them for the export market. Unfortunately, with the trade disagreements we have, China export is completely gone. And so that is not an option. So it can cause you to have to haul your spruce a really long ways. For instance, I've hauled spruce from the western Lane County clear to Glendale, because it's the only, Glendale's southern Lane County, because that's really the only market that's available. And that's where we get into this situation. Same thing can happen with Valley Ponderosa Pine, that there are markets in Roseburg and Glendale who will take it for veneer, but it's a long ways to haul it. We're down to just a couple of cedar mills. We used to have a lot of cedar mills, and that is a case where mill infrastructure is starting to have a real influence on people selling logs. It is a thing that we as small woodland owners need to come to grips with, that we like high log prices, but when log prices get so high that the mills can't survive, then they close. And when they close, we have the mill market. And so be careful what you ask for. For instance, Ponderosa Pine, that's what happened to a lot of the mills in Eastern Oregon. Ponderosa Pine prices got so high. And with other products for molding and millwork, for composite products, pine solid wood sawmills could not compete. And the quality of wood was lower, so they could not make those products at a price that they could come out. So what does this mean to small woodland owners? Nationally, there's a persistent shortage of affordable housing, and it's something that we have to come to grips with. Interest rates, construction labor, lumber prices, all of those things influence our ability to have a good housing market. But Oregon is really well positioned to respond to that as long as we have sensible policies that allow us to grow and market trees. Oregon softwood lumber and plywood plays a vital role. When you see that 14% of the lumber in the national market comes from Oregon, 28% of the plywood. 3/4 of Oregon's log supply comes from private forests. And so management and continued management of private forests is very important. And log price and availability is subject to seasonal harvest constraints. And for the mill infrastructure to continue to be healthy, we have to have a consistent log supply where the mills can have adequate logs to run year round. Public agency stumpage is crucial just because of that. And at the same time, it's important that we have this mill infrastructure, logging and trucking infrastructure to work on and try to improve our forest health situation. I think it's inevitable that we'll have timber harvest reductions, and you're starting to be able to see that in the numbers that I showed. There's been a big reduction in harvestable land base due to the private forest accord restrictions. For instance, on our forest property, about 10% of additional land that is restricted now for forest management as a result of the private forest accord. The Labor Day 2020 fires burned almost 500,000 acres of private, and a lot of it young timber that was right at either pre-merge or just right at the very edge of merchantability. And so that's going to create a gap in the supply in the Willamette Valley because of the loss of those trees that would have been maturing over the next 25 years. The Department of Forestry, HCP, and the planned timber sale reductions. Again, that's a very important issue regarding how much timber is going to be available to run our mills. Projecting some pretty serious reductions, and that will have a lot of influence in Northwest Oregon. And then federal forests, as I said, have never met their goals for that predictable timber supply. And one of the things that just to me is terribly frustrating about the process that we have in managing federal forests is we are only salvaging a tiny fraction of the timber that's killed in these enormous wildfires that we have. Unfortunately, I believe there will be more consolidation of production and more mill closures and fewer mills available to buy logs on the west side. I think that's just inevitable. It will happen. Timber harvest policy constraints jeopardize healthy mill, logging, and trucking infrastructure. And with the cost of doing business, particularly with mills, once those mills are gone, they're pretty well. They know they're struggling in John Day, for instance, to try to resurrect that mill that closed. A lot of the reason that mill closed is simply because of the fact that they didn't have a good labor pool. And consequently, I don't think there's probably going to be a lot that will change that. Grant County is short on young people that want to work in the mill there, and a lot of them just go away. And then lastly, a reliable and steady timber resource is really imperative for people to want to invest in long-term improvement of mills and logging companies. We're seeing the number of logging contractors going down pretty rapidly. A lot of the long-term, really, really good contractors and good employers that worked all the time, paid family wage benefits, as the owners of those companies that were from my generation reach retirement, they really don't have anybody that wants to continue that risk and to continue the commitment that it takes, and consequently they're selling out. And so it's creating a real shortage of contractors to cut and haul logs. With that I'll be done, and I'm glad to answer any questions, and I hope we can have a discussion about any of these things that you're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Open it up. I'm sure there are a lot of questions and discussion. Can we switch to being able to see the virtual people? Jeff has his hand up, so let's start with you, Jeff.
Gordon, that was terrific presentation. Thank you so much. Really helpful. I can't help but be a little selfish in my question. So at our place, we are shifting what we're planting. We're planting more ponderosa pine. We're planting more incense cedar. We can't plant any more western red cedar. So I'm wondering what conversations you're hearing from the mills about the future of the timber that's going to be coming their way, and how do we think about that as small forest landowners?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that at Oregon Small Woodlands Association, it's one of the things that we think about, and we try to help our members figure out, okay, if I plant ponderosa pine, which an awful lot of valley ponderosa pines have been planted over the last 25 years, what are we going to do with that? And to try to establish committees to help us find people that are interested in developing products. I know, for instance, there was an effort made to some mills that had traditionally not cut ponderosa pine to start a program to cut it. And I wouldn't say that it was really successful, but it wasn't hopeless. It was mostly dealt with just fine tuning the mill so it would run it properly. The lumber was fine, but the pitch was a big problem. And so that would be the fact that it gummed up the mill. And so that's the kind of thing that we deal with. I do believe that as this ponderosa pine comes online, that we'll start to find that there are people that are interested in making investments to utilize it, either for veneer or for traditional pine lumber. Another species that I think we're going to see in the valley, particularly down this way a little bit, there are people planting it up your way, redwood, coastal redwood. And coastal redwood grows extremely well and it is extremely valuable. It's actually more valuable than Douglas fir, and it grows faster than Douglas fir. And there's a lot of it being planted. And I believe that particularly with the value, that we will see some creative small operators that will develop mills to kind of coastal and get that into the local market. And so I think that is a really good opportunity. We're planting coastal redwood places that we have Douglas fir because it is tolerant of that. Where when we plant Doug fir, if we have Douglas fir root rot, we've still got it, and the trees are going to succumb just like the others did. So I hope that's kind of what you're looking for.
Yes, thank you.
I've got a comment though on the redwood, and
Yeah.
I'm having personal experiences with it. As the coastal redwood gets planted inland more, it becomes very susceptible to freeze.
Mhm.
And you can see where the elements of timing, and we get cold winters that freeze, a lot of the redwood will succumb.
Mhm.
And now it's dynamic and it's very prolific, it comes back, but now you get multiple shoots and the challenges of managing all that. So I'm not aware of any coastal redwood doing that well in the valley area there. You see the sequoia redwood, which doesn't have the same lumber value because of the nature of the lumber of that tree versus the coastal redwood. And we see those, as a matter of fact, go to the University of Oregon, it's surrounded in the sequoias.
Yeah, there's a couple of,
Back here too.
yeah,
Because
there's
they
a
do well.
couple of small woodland owners one in the Monmouth area and then one just up in McKenzie that have had a great deal of success with redwood. And they have stands now that are about 25 years old that are really commercial stands. And they're really nice redwood. And so I do recognize that because I had frost damage in some of my redwood. It knocked the tops out. It didn't kill the tree, but it killed the tops. And, but, that's a problem. It's part of the life of, as Jeff and I were talking about being a tree farmer. The world is full of things that aren't favorable for you. But it is just one of the risks of being a small woodland owner.
And currently you have to truck it all the way over to Crescent City, basically, with that region.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of reloads actually that are buying it. And, when it's worth $1,000, you can afford to haul it quite a ways.
That's a high value.
It's very high value. And it'll be interesting to see as, this juvenile redwood, young redwood like that, if that really coarse grained redwood will be accepted. I don't know the answer to that. But there is some of it being sawn. I know Roseburg Lumber had a large patch of coastal redwood down at Beachport that was planted. It was just about 40 years old, and they took off about 50,000 of the acre off of that. So that it was grew pretty fast, and it was very tall and very high quality. And they were very happy with the results. And I'm not sure exactly what they did with it or where they sold it. But it demonstrated that it's possible. That's far, far beyond what you're going to get out of Douglas fir, probably on that same site.
And another comment I have is in talking about selecting species. One of our samples that took place here in the valley 25, 30 years ago was cottonwood.
Yeah.
Where we came in and planted a lot of lowlands in the cottonwoods for pulp primarily was the outlet of it.
Yeah.
Watch that flounder and flake off.
Well, one of the things about the poplar and cottonwood for the pulp market is the fact that we've seen our pulp and paper industry in the Pacific Northwest. It's virtually half the size that it was 20 years ago. And so that's had a lot of real influence in the fact that that industry was expanding with remodels and improvements in some of the plants at that time, that there was a projected shortage, and that was going to be able to fill, particularly for those mills along the river, part of their supply. And unfortunately, the mills in the Pacific Northwest, with a combination of wood supply and the type of markets that our products went into, succumbed to the competition in the U.S. South, where the pulp and paper industry is enormous compared to our very small industry here. Here, the mills rely to a great extent on residual chips from mills, and the pulp logs, chip logs, are really just residual to the saw log harvest. We're in the South, they grow pine and thin pine that goes just into pulp paper. So they have a much cheaper raw material base. Yeah.
And I've got some comments on pine, particularly the valley pine. I mean, a career with the plywood industry and buying logs, where I came from. Basically, when we worked with young, small ponderosa pine, it wasn't acceptable because of pitch.
Mm-hmm.
It had an extremely high intensity of pitches that created issues when you started drying it and clearing it from air pollution to equipment downturns. And so it was never preferred. Our preferred became lodgepole pine, which was a small, more dense pine that grows in the higher elevations. You can also see an element of it in the coast range of a coastal.
Mm-hmm.
They call it coastal lodgepole, but it's a 2-needle coastal pine that has some usages in plywood. And those are for inferior products, I say, because primarily that wood goes into the inner ply of the sheet of plywood. It's used as an inner fill. So it doesn't have to have the same specifications as the surface elements do. And what you see is an outlet of it. But that again is tying to a buyer that wants to use that product and has worked with it and has a system that can consume it and manufacture it and produce it as a commodity.
Yeah. And the lodgepole pine, as long as it's not just salvage, is really a valuable log. Again, half a lifetime ago, we bought lots of lodgepole too, but we made studs out of it and shipped them into the south central states and southwest states. And that was actually more profitable than Douglas fir and studs. So but unfortunately, that type of log is really not readily available anymore, because the only lodgepole pine really being cut is just dead lodgepole pine. And the good lodgepole pine on the Forestry list, unfortunately, is mostly just from year to year being burned out.
And it feels like it's going to just become more and more complicated for certainly for small woodland owners, as summers get longer and drier and hotter, and certainly on the eastern side of the 5. I mean, I think that some of the really close to the 5, you can see a few of those nice redwood stands, but as you get further out, there's more and more struggle, even in industrial timber, to get Douglas fir to grow. And so there is going to be a shift in what people can plant just so they can meet reforestation requirements, because dead trees don't meet that requirement. So, but that will be an interesting conundrum for small woodland owners, and then for infrastructure as well.
Yeah, it certainly is, because just like you guys, we were trying to plant trees in a unit during that heat dome period, and we ended up on one particular unit, we planted 700 trees per acre to get 300.
Yeah.
And we finally have it. I think you did the same thing, and we finally have it established, and it's looking good. But boy, we spent a lot of money to do it. I think there's kind of, you're experiencing that as well, Jeff.
Well, one thing I'm following up with Gordon there and what he's talked about from similar experiences as Gordon. I like to promote our valley as probably one of the best regions for timber production and manufacturing facilities that consume and utilize our commodities. And we're very fortunate to compare that when you just look at Eastern Oregon, where the handful of towns that are left compared to what was there 50 years ago is significant. Matter of fact, you had a lot of economic development, not only in the west side, but the east side through the national forest harvest levels and all that were curtailed into the 90s. And so we are, in the simplest of form, blessed that we have these options and opportunities in the valley. Not that they haven't changed when you talk about the dynamics of ownership from the little family man that sat out here in the back county somewhere and tried to put up his own little sawmill, and the next thing his neighbor bought him out, and the next thing is another bigger company buys him out. And we've seen this tremendous consolidation to a large network of basically large industrial investment corporations that run the industry today. There are a few little players, but they're on the minority. And we've seen this take place, but I will also say what it has evolved as we have the dynamics in our timber supplies and how we look at timber from the old growth management philosophy to our young management principles of today. We see mills also adapting and changing their whole standards of production. It's rare to see the big old head rig out there running anymore, but rather you see the slam bam, thank you, man, high speed timber mill going to place and running it. Matter of fact, just like Sierra Pacific's rebuilding a lot of the Seneca mill down in Eugene area, which is a very sophisticated mill in the first place, but they're still talking about upgrades from technology to processes of cutting logs. And that's why today we deal with an 8-inch or a 6-inch or a 4-inch top diameter versus 30 inches or 60 inches. And, you know, I look back in my career when you could see 3 logs on a truck. Now you see 30 or 50. I mean, that's the dynamics of the changing resources that we're dealing with, from everything from the harvest activities, to the hauling activities, to the manufacturing, to the commodities produced.
Yeah.
And I see today one of the big things in the commodity markets that we produce, primarily because we're heavily influenced by the construction industry of building houses and buildings, that purpose. And we are deeply tied to interest rates, bank loans and mortgages, and the ability to sell lumber so that somebody can build a house, and there's somebody that can afford to build that house and wants to take on those investments. And it's another world out there when you think about it. It doesn't hurt to think about what are interest rates doing and how will that influence my potential to sell logs in 2 months, 6 months, or a year. It's all I can tell you is it's changed, but we are blessed to be here with the tree farm versus John Day.
One thing I would add to that is there are still a lot of family-owned companies in the manufacturing business that are very committed to our communities, very committed to our forest lands. For instance, Levi Beelar in Kelowna recently built a chip and saw mill where he'll handle logs from about 4 inches all the way up to, he will take bigger logs. He's told me that he's going to get to 30 inches. We'll see what happens. But he built that from scratch, built it from the ground up on an abandoned mill site. And then another example of someone who has invested not only in new mill equipment, but in technology and in engineering wood, Ferris and Lions. And they are a tremendous market for the type of wood that small woodland owners have for sale, looking for that high quality stress rated veneer for their products. And so as long as we maintain a timber supply that justifies the investment of these people that want to stay in our business, we'll be able to continue these things. But we need to be very careful that we don't kill the golden goose, we might say, and cause people to have second thoughts about whether or not they want to continue the business, because it is a very risky business, and it's very cost intensive business to stay in the manufacturing side of the business.
I'm sorry, do you mind, we're running a little bit late. Do you have one very quick question, because I don't want to cut Jeff short.
I don't know that it's quick.
Okay, are you able to stay around a bit? or do you
I'll
just leave?
stay around till lunch. How about
Okay,
that?
can we talk about it at lunch? Is that what you?
Sorry.
Thank you so much. A great
my pleasure.
conversation and very, very interesting presentation. Our next item is Jeff Hirsch, who's going to be presenting on land succession issues for small forest landowners. Sorry, Amanda, this I wanted to keep on the agenda.
Well, those are really interconnected because as Gordon was saying, well, they're getting set up yes, we need people. It's a delicate thing to keep that milling infrastructure going, but that's a symbiotic relationship too, because what keeps small woodland owners keeping their lands as forests too, rather than shifting it to another, lobby.
Jeff, you're up.
Great, okay.
Oh, and I'll give you a few minutes from our break too, so I don't want to cut you short. Feel free to
Okay.
take your whole half hour.
Thank you. Gordon's going to be a tough act to follow. Let's see what I can do. I'm also here to talk about the crisis. Sorry about that, everyone, but I want to talk a little bit about the succession crisis, small forest landowners. And I've had conversations for months now with lots of stakeholders, including some people in this room.
Oh, can I just talk? Oh,
Sure.
Can you do a teeny bit of introduction of self?
I'm gonna get to
Okay,
that.
great, okay.
So lots of conversations. Some people in this room have been really helpful. I suspect most of us would agree this is a terrible time to start another land trust. And yet here I am to make the case today. Briefly, my background, I founded a marketing communications business 30 years ago called Narrative Lab, strategic storytelling, mostly in the areas of conservation, restoration. And we've worked in video and print and multimedia. This is an image of the last moments of the Marmot Dam on the Sandy River, just as it's being demolished for salmon passage. And we made a 1-hour film for National Geographic Television about this project. But now I'm into a new chapter of restoration. That's my daughter. And this was about 5 years ago on our first family tree planting day. We are accidental small forest landowners. My wife and I were Portlanders, and like so many, we were looking for a little place in the woods. And just as we were about to give up in finding that because we couldn't afford it, we found 81 acres that were magically affordable. And we dove in. And I was naive enough at that moment to think that I could manage 81 acres, but that's a different slide deck. So we are 45 minutes southeast of Stumptown. Our place is at the northern end of the Willamette Valley and in the foothills of the Cascade Range approaching Mount Hood. We've already sort of had this conversation, but I'm an amateur member of a population that I didn't know existed. And we're called all sorts of names: family forest owners and tree farmers, the sexiest one of all, non-industrial tree growers, etc. So I'm one of about 10 million small forest owners in the US, one of 60,000 or so in Oregon. And we all know that it's the moms and pops who steward the majority of America's forests. What is a small forest? Well, in Oregon, at least administratively, if you have 5,000 acres or less, you're a small forest landowner. But the average size is 94 acres.
It's how many?
94.
94.
Yes. So this, by the way, is not the face of a typical small forest landowner. He's part of a restoration crew and someone who would love to own a place of his own. There is a pent-up demand among young people for small forest lands. Just ask your local ODF forester and you'll find out. But they can't afford them unless you get lucky like we did. It's really a rich person's game. This is more accurately the face of the small forest steward. And maybe you know Doug Stinson. If you do, you are a lucky person. Doug is, I think, 91 now, ex-Marine, lifetime yoga practitioner, a master in the woods. I will never know a fraction of what Doug knows, and just a fantastic human being. Doug is also the face of one of the biggest challenges that we have, which is small forest landowners aging out. In his case, he's got heirs who will continue his legacy. If you can make out the slide, this is from the National Woodland Owner Survey of 2018, and you can see how the demographics are skewed to an older population. And now here's the big reveal. This is how many acres of small forest land that we have lost in Oregon in the last decade. And it's really a result of small forest owners aging out. That's 1/4 of our small forest lands in the state. Where did those acres go? This is a photograph of the industrial forest property that's just next to ours. Glenn Ahrens checked my math and he said, well, it looks like about 800,000 acres over this period went to industrial ownership. We can see that some was converted to ag. I am assuming that some piece of it also went to house lots. Really, the question is, so what? Does that actually matter? I want to be clear, I don't have a fight to pick with industry. I live in a stick-built house. I'm sure plenty of that wood came from industrial forest land. But small working forests and the folks who steward them are really a world apart. Geographically, our properties tend to link higher elevation public lands with the valleys, and these are truly habitat corridors and stepping stones. Anecdotally, I would say that unlike our industrial neighbors, we have to vex our tube every tree we have, not just cedars, to protect them against the deer. And wildlife like this guy cover at our place. Well, what about the people? These are the Dalton's Oregon Tree Farmers of the Year in 2024. And like so many of their peers, their libraries, full of hard-won knowledge of place and deep skills and many connections in their communities, rich social and cultural capital. And ultimately, I would say it's because of their owners that small working forests are truly unique places. But the public has no idea. Anyone know where this guy resides?
Right off Interstate Ave in North Portland.
You nailed it. It's in the Kenton neighborhood. This is the public's view of those of us who own chainsaws and work in the woods. We're all just Paul Bunyans in a stock pot called the timber industry. Meanwhile, Americans have very warm feelings for the family farmer and the family rancher, and they are icons thanks in part to Hollywood and decades of farm aid fundraisers. But in comparison, small forest owners are invisible. We've never existed in the American imagination. But we do use our chainsaws, of course. Our story is just a little bit more complicated. This, I hope you can make it out, this is a list of reasons in order of importance why small forest owners own forest land per the 2018 National Woodland Owner Survey. But really what this is a description of our value set. Let's remind ourselves quickly what small forest owners do on our forests. Obviously, we're economic engines for the production of forest products, but we're also in the unpaid business of providing ecological services, the oxygen, the clean water, the habitat, and so on. The opportunities to increase carbon storage and fire resilience on our places are largely untapped. And at a time in history when we actually might want to see more of both of those. 2 decades ago, OFRI surveyed Oregon small forest owners, and this was their conclusion: a dramatic transition of title. But that dramatic transition is still in process. National Woodland Owner Survey again indicates that most small forest owners in Oregon are 75. If we could move quickly, we might provide succession options to a community that we suspect would like to have them. OSU, of course, supports the Ties to the Land program to help interested landowners and their heirs with the succession process. But if you don't have heirs or your heirs aren't interested, then what do you do? This is what you do. Sell. Are there any other options? This is my friend, Guy Trombley. He's an applied anthropologist and also a colleague on this adventure. Guy and I both consulted with the Washington Farm Forestry Association on a really interesting project funded by their legislature that was designed to look at ways to incentivize the 218,000 small forest owners in Washington to store more carbon in their trees. But what's germane to this conversation is that he did dozens of intensive interviews with small forest owners across Washington, and he had a few key findings. The first is that if you don't have heirs, or if your heirs aren't interested, referring to small forest owners as family forest owners, it's really hurtful. It's painful. It's a door closer. But here's what really surprised us. Several interviewees said that they were ready to hand over the keys without compensation, if only they could find someone who would sustain their legacies. And I had a conversation with Peter Hayes some months ago. You may know Peter. He mentioned in that conversation that one of his neighbors had come over with keys recently. I just met with somebody from the land trust in Minnesota, and she said, we have these conversations all the time. I think as good capitalists, stories like this may not surprise us, but these are not new stories. So my wife's great-grandfather grew up in a big family. He was farmed out to a farm couple in McMinnville. When they aged out, they handed over the keys, and that farm is still in our family. So it's a real thing, but now we have turnover at scale. So what do? To me, this looks like an opportunity for a land trust toolkit. Are there some models that we could look at? Well, across the country, we know there are 42 state-based nonprofits like our own OSWA that represent small forest owners. In 1990, even before OFRI made reference to our demographic time bomb, the main woodland owners saw what was coming and started their own land trust. With almost no marketing, they've conserved nearly 12,000 acres all across Maine, mostly as community forests, accessible to the public, and these remain working lands, pay their taxes. Many of you probably know the New England Forestry Foundation. It's probably the nation's leading organization for conserving working forest land of all sizes. And they're, in fact, 6th largest land trust in the country. This is their dashboard of outcomes to date. They are sophisticated and unafraid to try new things. For now, to my knowledge, there is no land trust focused on small working forests. For that matter, the Pacific Northwest. But for agriculture, we've got the Oregon Agricultural Trust and a state-supported sister organization called the Oregon Ag Heritage Program. And I'm grateful for those programs. They matter and they're making a difference. But we lack parallel support for small working forests. And we're not going to find it if we don't actively seek it. Meanwhile, I would say that our natural allies in the conservation community, especially the land trusts, are largely reluctant to jump into this. Why is that? Well, partly, I think it's because of what I'm calling the small parcel problem. You know, as small forest owners, I think all of us think that our places are beautiful, and that's because they are. But they may not have species of concern. They may not have water on them. And not infrequently, they need lots of work, thinning and weed management and planting. So if you're a land trust, you might rather spend $25,000 on an easement for 1,000 acres with a great story attached to it. And I get it. So where does that leave us? What do? We could let the status quo quo trend play out. And I can't say how long it's going to be before we lose the next 1 million acres, but it's going to be sooner than a decade. The second option, I think, is let's find an existing organization, an obvious stakeholder that's willing to take on this adventure. That was certainly my hope, but so far we haven't found that organization. In fact, we haven't found an Oregon NGO that's adjacent to this issue that's willing to offer us fiscal sponsorship so that we can incubate our ideas. So option number 3 is at a time in history when funders are trying to backfill gaps that have been left by the exit of federal support for conservation. Do we start a new nonprofit? And then there's a fourth option, which is my favorite. Keola, are you out there? Let's ask Keola to just take this on. So quiet.
Jeff, I want to so badly, and I think it is great to hear how much progress you have made, and just sort of even the storytelling and the case making is, I mean, we'll talk more when you're done, but it's impressive.
Thanks. This is my friend Andrew Schwartz and Sage. Andrew's dad was a surveyor for the Forest Service, and Andrew's made a career working in conservation policy. He's got a really interesting, unusual skill set with a degree in sociology and a master's from the Union Theological Seminary. He's been working with me since last year because this feels like, quote, his ministry. Given the options in front of us, and Andrew and I are really on the cusp of using number 3, which is starting a new entity. Cascadia Small Working Forests are giving us mostly unsung but still significant benefits. At a time when we know the planet is overheating from a greenhouse gas that trees naturally absorb, when we can see that wildfires are consuming an ever larger share of state budgets, we know that rural workforce development is in demand, and it's obvious that we have polarizing divisions between rural and urban populations. To us, it feels like conserving small working forests to leverage solutions for these challenges would be good public policy. Here's our draft mission statement. You guys know what land trusts do, so I'm not going to spend time with that, but you could expect the traditional tools and mechanisms with a focus on respecting our forestry elders and finding ways for a new generation of stewards to come in and take ownership. And of course, there would be policy and education components too. But beyond that, we think that there are some unique possibilities. We get pretty excited about the idea of building bridges between rural and urban folks. Imagine applying the model of community-supported agriculture to small working forests. What would that look like? On a subscription basis, urbanites could manage their climate anxiety in a tangible way by storing their carbon in local forests where they could touch the trees and meet the stewards.
And pull the Scotch.
Right, and pull the Scotch broom. So building these kinds of connections, that could be one of the most important outcomes, even though it's not our primary focus. These young people are from an NGO called Ant Farm, the end of a long day of fuels reduction on our place. The need for expanding the pool of dedicated, hard-working, and knowledgeable forest workers is so pressing. For most forest restoration companies, fire season pays the bills, right? Which limits their availability, especially given that larger property owners get priority. So we need a lot more help in the small forest owner community, and we think there are opportunities to facilitate that. What is next? We absolutely need fresh survey data. Every stakeholder, I think, would benefit from a better understanding of our small forest owners as they navigate transition. How many have no heirs or interested heirs? I have no idea. What do they need by way of support? What's the appetite for what we're proposing? What are we missing or getting wrong? We really need clarity from our stakeholders. Will you support us? Would you collaborate with us? We need a sense of funder interest. So I would say to you all, now is a great time to talk us out of this wacky idea, please. Or to lend us your support. And with that, I'd love to open it to questions.
What size are you thinking of as small parcel?
Well, I think about that 94 acre
Still
average.
big.
It's still big. And I think we should be open to things as small as, say, 20 acres. I think less than 20 acres is going to be really difficult. But I don't think we want to do anything except keep the doors open. But it's going to be expensive.
Because that is like the dilemma, like, you know, when we're small, is that 40-ish?
Yeah.
And the ish depends on, you know, who's counting the acres.
Yeah.
You know, are they for the taxes or what? So, yeah, but that's a lot of small properties.
So Jeff, one thing I've heard lately, as far as, it was from a landowner west of, I think you're out by Vernonia. So it's a LLC, it's been in their family for ages. They have this piece of property. The neighboring property decided they were going to sell their land, and they said, hey, let us know when you're going to sell the property. But the neighboring property didn't. They went to the highest bidder and sold it off. That person being flipped around and they're going to build houses. And so I think what's going on is they're up against that. Be up against something like that is trying to be interesting to figure out how you can make that. I won't tell people what to do with their property, but it'd be interesting to at least, you know, allow them to pass the keys to the neighboring property and actually expand their LLC rather than turn this into more houses out there. Because for me, an agency that has to do the firefighting, more houses out in the woods, I think it's just going to be a huge problem. If we keep expanding out those woods. That's my personal thing. I should say.
And if I may, along that same line, Jeff, I have my tree farm 90 acres, just probably within 7 miles of Eugene, out on the fringe towards the coastside, which used to be historically old homesteads and little farms and some industrial timberland that joined it. But today we're seeing what Mike's bringing up is larger parcels are bought, somehow partitioned and structured so that residential construction can go on them. And the challenge is the prices. I don't know what Mike's brings, but in our area, I've seen some selling 10 to 15,000 an acre. You're not talking timber measurement, we're talking an acre. And if you have commercial value on it, then timber wise, that jumps up. And I also find that I live on my property, the wife and I, and you have a different perspective of it when you live on it, wake up on it, and go to bed there at night trying to deal with any and all of the issues. If you're a distant owner, I'm not condemning them, but I'm just saying you don't have that perspective of having that bear at your front door in the morning when you wake up, or watching the elk move through the field and get an excitement about it. It's not negative because we're out there because we wanted to see that. We enjoyed it. I'm a forester, and my life was, why not live in a forest?
The one thing I would say, one of the differences I think between Oregon and Washington is Washington has much more development pressure on their forest lands than we do in Oregon because of our zoning. So truly the biggest transition of land is going to industrial, and that's not to minimize what you're both talking about, which is the house lot check.
But what we're seeing now is a move more to be like Washington. You want development in the communities, Portland, Oregon, Salem. You want expansion to build houses on. That takes land. And I'm just watching Eugene as they work out and fringing along with, I go back to the memory of it's an old farm. Now it's a multiplex apartment complex or residential development.
Can we jump up to Mauricio, who's had his hand up for a while? Mauricio?
Thank you. Jeff, thank you. Great presentation. One of those 60,000 Oregonian that lives and owns some forest land. So I love the idea. I know it's a crisis. I thank you for what you're doing. One quick question about the average. You said 94 acres. Is that the average or the median?
It's the average.
The average. Do you have any idea where the middle observation falls in that?
I don't, but maybe Julie does. She's the keeper of facts.
That's the junk spot.
All right.
That's 28, but I'll send you the fact sheet, Mauricio.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Fantastic. And the other question is the name of the organization that I would love to follow up with this conversation here with you, but we don't have the time today, but I will. Is Cascadia Working Forest Trust? Is that the name?
That's our draft name, yes.
Could you scroll back to your slide with the mission statement? I want to write that down and it got away from me.
Okay, so cool. Thank you. I appreciate it. I leave the floor to other for questions. Thank you.
Carolyn, did you have a
One
question?
after that.
Oh, after, as long as we're looking at our virtual people, did you have a hand up?
I did have my hand up, but I think Julie might have been before me. Julie, did you
Okay.
want to go? And then I'll.
Sure. Yeah, and I also, as we all know, there's many factors, and I appreciate Jeff bringing this forward. I also want to nod to OSWA and their work to this last session on the estate tax, and I think that's worth noting. That's one thing that we also know a lot of landowners, the estate tax is what often gets, especially about the third time that it's transferred, and them working diligently with the leaders to get that for smallholder owners. And then, Jeff and I have had conversations about the survey and doing it again. And that is something we've put on the docket for the Partnership for Forestry Education. And that includes many of you around the table to have the conversation of what would we like to survey and what can we find out. And I would say, one of the things, Jeff, I've struggled with, and I'll just be that open and honest, is as a state agency, we can't promise to do survey work that then feeds private and business, although many people probably use it for that. And so I'm always on an edge trying to walk this line of, just as an open of, I think this survey is important. I think many of us know this is an important topic, but also when someone's trying to set up what might be a private business, we also have to just be cautious. We're not doing something that's just for a business in the end. So we're very open to the conversation. I think a survey for the group is an important conversation to continue, and we're supportive of that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Private benefit, always an important issue for nonprofits and for agencies, but I think it is a big question. Hopefully there's a lot of applications for that kind of survey data. And Jeff, I find this to be a really compelling, obviously an important issue. And I think the idea, while it's hard to stand up another land trust, I think it is you've tried very hard to find a home. And I think it makes sense to have something that's really focused on this the same way that Oregon Ag Trust is focused on agricultural lands. And I guess my only very minor comment is I think we kind of throw ourselves under the bus when we say that Oregon's land use laws prevent the kind of outcomes that we see in Washington. We do have a strong land use system, and I'm grateful for it, but it is there's still a pathway to that same kind of smaller parcelization and subdivision with home development. It's just slower. So I would just strongly recommend, as you're thinking about how to make the case for funding focused on this and for the need to conserve those smaller parcels, because once they go into industrial ownership, that becomes a REIT, that becomes highest and best use as home development. So it doesn't always go that way, but that's certainly a business model. And if it becomes converted to farmland and then farms get subdivided, I just think it's just a slower slide. So it's my only critique.
Thanks, Carolyn. Sorry, Matt, your side, last question. We'll have one question and then we're going to have sort of a quick bio break because Neil's is coming on probably at 11:45. Go ahead.
Okay, so, so Josh, I don't really know you, but I represent Associated Oregon Loggers on this committee. And one thing I just want to name, because I don't know you and I love to get to know you better, is that, when we're talking, like, words are important. When we say that we've lost all of that land, that's a bit degrading to me because most of that has gone to industrial. And that's a lot of work for the folks that I represent. So maybe utilizing words like transfer, it might be better to make sure that we're kind of all aligned, So just to name that, because it was stirring up some emotions in me.
Good.
I want to just, name that for that sake. But I do appreciate what you're trying to do. And I guess one comment, not from AOL, maybe taking that hat off and just me as Amanda Sullivan Astor, Forester, is that, my family and my generation, we want to own that land. And so I don't know the land trust model, if that then takes that land away from small families being able to own that in the future. Does that then go to somebody else's ownership so that I have less opportunity to potentially own a little piece of heaven for me and my family?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely not. So one of the models that the Oregon Agricultural Trust is using that I think is exactly germane for us is donate, conserve, sell. So what that means is you acquire a parcel through donation. You put an easement on it that's really based on the forest management plan and the vision of the family that's providing it. And then you sell it to a young person whose vision aligns with that forest management plan so that we can keep these places in the hands of small forest owners. And so that we can make them affordable. As you know, that's a huge part of this process.
Well, I think that's helpful to understand the model.
Sure.
Because I think they're, everything that Oz was doing, the Partnership for Forestry Education, the ties to the land, all of that, I think that's really critical. There's probably a lot of people that work for ODF, that work for the Forest Service, that work for private companies, that are foresters, that are young people that would love to have that opportunity.
Absolutely.
And there just isn't that connection point. Because we're raising families and trying to work and do all that too. So I think that that's really interesting, and keeping that working piece working, I think, is really, really critical, as well for the folks that I represent for AWEL.
We're not looking to, block it up. We want to keep it working, and that's why we feel like we need to have working in the name of.
All right, sorry to cut it short, but we're having a 5-minute break, and please stop promptly because we don't want to keep Mills waiting at 10:45. Thank you. Okay,
Reach me down.
I'm down,
we're
really.
down.
So
Because
it's,
Nils hopefully has been able to join us. Calling the meeting back to order.
excuse me.
Heather, have you seen if Nils has logged on? Okay, perfect. Our next agenda item is Nils Christopherson, who's joining us from Wallowa Resources. Thank you, Mauricio, for your connection with Nils and for helping get this on the agenda, and welcome, Nils.
You're on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear it when it's speaking. The
All
audio
right.
is either not working.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Do you see slides or not?
Yes. We
Okay.
see, we don't see the slideshow view though. It's like, you know what I mean? It has like, it's on.
Okay, let me see if I can fix that. Is that better?
Perfect, thank you.
All right. So I mentioned to Wendy that I think Maurizio, thank you for the invitation to be here today, and thank you for the whole committee for allowing me to present. I think Maurizio, you were kind of hoping I would talk big picture like I did to the Northeast Oregon Regional Solutions Advisory Committee, rather than very narrowly on new revenue streams, but I will try to get to that. I want to talk about a vision that's emerged in Eastern Oregon over the last 25 years around what is the value of our rural communities, rural landscapes, rural resources today. And how can we talk about that and advocate for that, and really realize the opportunity for improved landscape resilience, conservation, job creation, high wage jobs, rural prosperity. And we wrap that up in what we call the stewardship economy.
Nils, you have a little hand in the and it's covering your face. Like I think it's like your raised hand or pointing hand. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to just do a little bit of background, and I'll go through this pretty quick because it is background. But you know, for a long period of time now, we've seen a decline in farming and more broadly natural resource based jobs and what are termed blue collar jobs in manufacturing, and a rise in particularly professional class jobs. All of this, you know, I think there's good reason to accept the thesis that the rise in professional class jobs has really been driven by the opportunity for that class to specialize and not have to think about where their food, clothing, and building materials come from. That this smaller and smaller percentage of Americans working in natural resources are able to provide a surplus that allows for that specialization, but we're not returning value to land stewardship. We continue to extract that value. And you can see that in a whole range of metrics, including, you know, this change in productivity in the traditional sectors, but declining employment and static or declining wages over time. In Wallowa County, for example, the average wage in 2020 was actually less than the average wage in 1990. And so this is very real to us. Innovation is really driven in our urban areas, and we see that across the country. When we were recovering from the Great Recession, growth was very much concentrated in just a few areas. And this was called out because in all previous recessions, it was actually rural counties that recovered the quickest. So this was seen as a stark difference in our economic structure and the opportunities and constraints that are distributed geographically in very different ways in our country today. You can see that here as well with the geographic distribution of GDP. And yes, while there are flaws in GDP as a measurement of our economy, it is still used, and this image is quite stark. And then this morning when I was reading the news prior to joining you, this report from Daily Yonder was highlighting the Federal Reserve Board and Jerome Powell's remarks this week about the continuing worsening conditions of non-metro areas relative to our urban areas. In the rural West, this has been a long-term thing. Headwaters Economics, in a report in 2015, 2016, I believe, they did a report on the three Wests, and they highlighted that the isolated, they talked about metro counties, connected counties, and isolated counties. And about 50% of all the Western counties are these isolated, sparsely populated counties that make up almost 80% of the land area. And they're characterized by higher unemployment, increasing median age, low wage jobs, more volatile income. But I think all of us living in these counties would argue that we are missing significant opportunities to increase productivity and really restore community well-being while we achieve conservation goals. That the increased production of high quality food, fiber, energy products does not need to come at the cost of conservation. And the rural West matters for a lot of reasons. Like I said, we've got the opportunity to really contribute more to the region and the country's needs. It also is the headwaters of a lot of the West's freshwater resources, supports an enormous amount of wildlife habitat and recreation opportunity. And as Jeff mentioned previously, has the opportunity to contribute significantly to carbon sequestration and storage. And the storage is obviously important because it doesn't matter as much if we sequester it, if we then lose it in a big wildfire. It also, as you all know, has a significant amount of our federal lands, yeah, it's broadly valued nationally, but underinvested in. And today we've got a number of significant threats from climate change, from much higher, much more severe, more frequent wildfire, increased conversion of working lands and natural lands to support development, in particular housing development, as again Jeff mentioned earlier. And I appreciate that reference to the 1 million acres. I hadn't seen that before. As well as pollution and invasive species. And again, when we talk about the stewardship economy, we think we're missing, again, significant opportunities to invest in a whole range of new land management strategies and community structures that allow us to achieve triple bottom line outcomes that I think should be easy to support. So a stewardship economy, we say that's an economy shaped by the need and responsibility to manage for the sustainability of both the land and our communities. And we believe that in the rural West, the most valuable assets we have are our lands and the people who steward them. And we say it like that because a lot of our counties, when we lost our forest products and infrastructure or any of the other dominant natural resource based employment over the last 25, 30 years, there was a scramble amongst traditional economists and development people to just look for what could replace that number of jobs. And in Wallowa County, they looked at call centers, they looked at any other manufacturing facility that could come in. They even talked about whether we should try to become a place for a new federal or state prison. They were just desperately seeking something that would put all these hundreds of people we lost in the woods back to work. But through a lot of community conversations, we recognized that, you know, that's not what we wanted. We didn't just want to become some generic place that you could plug and play some block investment, call center, prison, whatever, just to put people back to work. We wanted to roll up our sleeves and really figure out how do we reimagine what a rural community committed to land stewardship, natural resource management, and production looks like moving forward. And in order to do that, we really need to invest in it again, and make sure we value all these dispersed values of our land and our community beyond the simple calculus that suggests that the hold sell value between working lands and selling for houses, you know, in our area, it can be over 3 to 1 in favor of selling land to build houses in many areas. And that's just an oversimplification, I think, of the value that these lands hold to society and the public as a whole. When we talk about the stewardship economy, we don't think about it as just sort of a distinct from or separate from a lot of other things that are happening in our communities. We recognize the importance of having diversified rural economies, that we don't want to be wedded to a singular sector and go through the boom and bust that we've been through already. But we want that, we need that core sort of center of gravity around land stewardship to ensure that some of the opportunities don't begin to overwhelm the land use planning, community commitment, neighbor to neighbor, over the fence line relationships that large landscape restoration and stewardship requires. And we've seen that in many places, including just last week, the community in northern Idaho asked me to come up to speak because they feel like they've been overwhelmed by recreation, that they've really become overly simplified around recreation. It has driven up housing costs over $800,000. And a lot of the people that live and work in that area, including in natural resources, can no longer afford to live there. So we want to have some safeguards around that, but while still acknowledging that recreation has an opportunity to bring both additional value and jobs to our communities, but also create a point of connection between our communities and the much larger urban populations, and a chance to tell our stories and maybe build relationships and build support for what we're trying to do. It also will require a continued investment in innovation. And again, I think Gordon spoke a lot to that this morning. So we see kind of 5 cornerstones to a stewardship economy. The first, obviously, is continued investment in land and water stewardship. We need to think about how our value-added businesses support new and different forms of land management, how and really begin to drive, think not just about the businesses, but the supply chains as well. And how do we drive or secure, capture higher margins back to the landowner, the land manager, and the actual management activities associated with long-term land stewardship. In order to do that, we need more access to capital and capital in smaller, at smaller scales. A lot of the work that, a lot of the opportunities in rural communities are at scales that are smaller than most financial investors, including banks, want to commit to because of the way they approach risk analysis and underwriting. And we need to figure out how to do that because we're missing a lot of opportunities that would support land stewardship, value-added production, supply chain development, training, just because we can't get access to the capital that is needed at the scales that smaller rural communities could use. Education and training that supports not just continued R&D and innovation, but really helps train the next generation of land stewards. So our youth, so running from K-12 through college and creating more on the job, practical job, job exposure, field-based learning opportunities so that kids begin to see and imagine a future in land stewardship. And many of you probably knew and fondly remember Thomas Mannis, the past dean of the College of Forestry at OSU. When he came out here to meet with us, I asked him if he would meet with our high school juniors and seniors. We got a great turnout. He did an incredible job talking about growing up in Missouri and really connected with them through those stories. And then he just blew their mind with sort of the innovation and range of new jobs in forestry that none of them had ever had exposure to. Because here it was still sort of people operating chainsaws, log trucks, logging machines, but none of the other innovation that was taking place that were they aware of. And I don't think I've ever gotten so many phone calls from parents in the community after Thomas Mannis spoke to those high school juniors and seniors, and just how excited they were. And we really need to commit to more of that so that we get that next generation interested in doing this and not limited in their vision of what opportunities they have that may be contributing to them moving away and moving to pursue other jobs in urban areas. And then if we can build up enough support across our rural communities, really try to drive some changes in legislative policy frameworks at the state and federal level that support long-term stewardship and begin to reorient around local landowners and the partnerships between smaller landowners, industry, tribes, federal lands that make our communities thrive again. So some of the examples of things happening in Eastern Oregon, and you'll be familiar with all of these, but a big commitment to forest restoration, which has united a whole range of partners that sometimes were on opposite sides of the table, in the 80s, early 90s, have now united around a commitment to do active forest restoration across large landscapes. And it's beginning to create more jobs, more log volumes available to the mill. As Gordon mentioned earlier this morning, when the mill in John Day shut down, I think that was the first time in 26 years that I've been here that I didn't see a primary cause for mill closure being lack of logs or insufficient log supplies. There it was lack of workforce. And it is through this commitment to science-based forest restoration that we've really seen a ramp up in forest management activity and treatment at large landscape scale. We've seen some, but not enough investment in value-added manufacturing. Gordon again spoke to that really well this morning, and I actually captured one of his slides that I'm going to re-show again in a second. we've done some of that. Some of you may be aware that we help support the development of Heartwood Biomass, which is a small integrated non-saw log wood products facility, basically trying to use the logs that none of the larger mills in our area can use, and convert that to a range of products and local jobs. At the last count, I think there was about 18 jobs at that mill. Investments in renewable energy, looking at community ownership of land, not as the first priority, because we believe in private land ownership and the long-term value of private land stewardship. But if we think the land is going to be either converted to some other use, or there's some debate about whether it should go into state or federal ownership, we think there's a lot of reason to be at least exploring the value of community ownership as a fourth type of tenure that allows for the community itself to both invest in the management, but learn from that management, and hopefully through that process of working together through a multiple use management plan of locally owned land, that it helps inform and balance our views about management on other lands, particularly our federal lands across Eastern Oregon. What I'm talking about is not just unique to Wallowa County. This was a study done by graduate students at the University of Michigan several years ago, just before COVID. And they found numerous examples of sort of the same types of approaches and concepts and values being expressed across the West. I won't go into this, but just you can see it really quickly. Like, these are different ideas around trying to build stronger regional economies tied to land stewardship. Some people refer to it as regional bioeconomies. I'm not sure that's the right term for us out here, but these concepts and ideas are very much central to how we think we can revitalize many of our rural communities today, and that prosperity can be long-term. But sort of going back to Gordon's talk today, we do, particularly when we talk about forestry, which obviously is central to this committee's work, we've got a long-term problem in Eastern Oregon. And his graph of the remaining mills and sort of the scarcity of mill processing capacity in Eastern Oregon really captured my attention. Back in the early 2000s, Governor Kulongoski asked me to chair the East Side Forest Advisory Panel. And I've shared a quote from a report we produced in 2004, that talked about historically there had been 65 mills east of the Cascades. By 2004, it had dropped to 15, and we anticipated in 2004 that it would drop to 10 by 2013. And in fact, I think we're down to like 7 today. But that the end result of that was that many areas of Eastern Oregon may become untreatable because of the combination of low timber value and high log hauling costs, as Gordon confirmed today. And that we were particularly concerned about that because it was going to undermine efforts to see increased restoration and stewardship of federal lands, but it was also likely going to lead to further conversions of non-industrial private forest lands in our region. And today, wildfire is just creating more challenge and complications for both management and ownership of forest land. In response to that, Some of you may know that I served on the Oregon Board of Forestry for a little bit over 8 years. But during one of those sessions, there was a discussion about the decline in active management and engagement of non-industrial private forest landowners in Oregon and nationally. And when I was driving home from Salem, I called the local ODF district forester, that was John Buckman at the time, and our OSU extension agent, Paul Esther. And I said, so are we seeing the same trend in Northeast Oregon? And they confirmed that we were. And so I asked if on my way home we could meet in John Buckman's office, and we sat down around his table and we said, maybe we need to work together to try to drive some change. And part of it was a recognition that today people trust different organizations and they receive information from different organizations. And if we could work together and deliver the same message coming from the state, coming from a university extension service, coming from a community-based nonprofit, that maybe we could begin to get more people trusting the same information and beginning to engage with us in a more meaningful way. Out of that, My Blue Mountain Woodlands partnership was born. The partnership expanded over time, particularly with some early investments by the American Forest Foundation. And today the partnership offers a broad range of education and training, basic forest management plan development, cost share for operations, and then a larger landscape and cross-boundary analysis of where they sit in the landscape and some of the issues that their partners or their neighbors, whether they're public, private, or tribal, are also trying to address. And we work with about, or at least we do outreach to about 3,000 non-industrial private forest landowners across 4 counties in Northeast Oregon. Shortly after that, a different partnership formed around our collective work with the Wallowa-Whitman and Umatilla National Forest. And that is the Northern Blues Restoration Partnership today. And over time, in part because of the My Blue Mountain Woodlands partnership, which is a partner here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's one of the partners here. It is an all lands partnership. So working on those national forests, these private lands, and as well as tribal forest land across multiple counties in Northeast Oregon and Southeast Washington. And that partnership is really driving significant change in our area. So it has a series of core strategies to accomplish its restoration goals. They're listed there on the left. We've got a 10-year commitment of funding through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. And after year 4, we had already achieved 445,000 acres of restoration, so 49% of our 10-year goal. And that included a mix of active restoration treatments as well as managed wildfire. But going back to the non-industrial private forest lands, this partnership, and particularly driven by My Blue Mountain Woodlands, has assisted 387 forest landowners to get basic forest management plans, which were designed to meet all of NRCS's requirements, their basic requirements or prerequisites for cost share funding. That in turn, and the outreach and engagement of the partners has led to over 641 forest management projects to improve the health of the forest, reduce wildfire, achieve different habitat objectives. We also do riparian work, and as I mentioned, there's a mix of active forest restoration as well as management of beneficial wildfire. And then more recently, there's been a big commitment to supporting the emergence of fire-wise communities within our wildland urban interface areas, as we really think sort of full landscape from our backcountry forest areas, including our wilderness areas where we need to use beneficial wildfire, through to our front country forest land where we're really investing in active restoration, thinning and slash treatment, prescribed fire, and then through to household defense and community wildfire defense through our Firewise communities. Just last year, the partnership invested $32.3 million in this effort. 20 million came from tribes and the whole range of partners. So about 12.3 million came from the federal government, and 72% was awarded to local contractors supporting a large number of jobs in our region. So just wrapping up, and I did some of these slides really quickly because I've been on the road. I apologize for that. But, you know, looking forward with some uncertainty about some of the federal support to these programs, you know, we recognize looking at 2026, the need for sustained investment and support for these partnerships. And collectively, the partnership recognizes or is committed to really trying to find improved wood utilization of the whole range of byproducts coming out of our forest restoration efforts, saw logs, non-saw logs, biomass, etc., and then trying to commit to solutions, real effective solutions in workforce development. So those are the kind of three keys we see moving forward to sustain and accelerate the progress we're making in Northeast Oregon.
Thank you so much, Niels. I'm sure we'll have hands up with questions. You want to chime in?
Actually, I'm hoping we could get all three of these presentations because it feels like this is a lot of information and a lot of different kind of wonderful things to think about. So that would be a request from all of our presenters to be able to have access to that, to revisit it. And then just one quick thought is, I think that I really appreciate that emphasis on partnership. And I think we need to be figuring out, I mean, that feels like a real push we need to keep making more and more of, is that idea. And actually, Niels, that was wonderful. You know, you have different trusted sources for different people. And some people will trust one and some people will trust another. And it's like, I think the more people at the table, that actually brings in more people, because you may have a vested interest in not trusting OSWA, but you might trust you because you came from Portland, you know, or, you know, all of those different kinds of things. And how we get more and more people at the table working together just seems extremely important. I don't know how we do that, but it just seems really important and inspiring, actually, when it works.
Yes, I have a question, which is whether or not there are other regional groups sort of similar to Allow Resources that are working in rural areas and presenting these same kinds of ideas for collaboration and for reinvigorating with these kinds of revenue streams, rural economies.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are. And in Eastern Oregon, you know, there's been a lot of work being done by Blue Mountain Forest Partners in Grant County, particularly on federal land management on the Malheur National Forest. And because of the initial success we were having with our My Blue Mountain Woodlands partnership, NRCS actually gave us additional money to basically be a pass-through or, you know, provide sub-awards to Blue Mountain Forest Partners and the Soil and Water Conservation District in Grant County to provide more support to private forest landowners in both range and forest management. And then we expanded that to do the same in Harney County with the High Desert Partners and in Klamath and Lake County. So there's about eight, 9 counties in Eastern Oregon that are now trying to work from a similar sort of playbook, but obviously adapting it to their specific landscapes, communities, landowner needs.
Thanks. Julie?
Thanks, Wendy. I just want to thank Niels and the Willow Resource team. I've worked with you guys for a lot of years and just what you've done in that community, but being such a sustainable and continual source to help keep that group together. You know, it's hard with agencies as people change and move and new people come in, and Willow Resources has really just been such a steadfast for that community. So really appreciate that and your information today. And I do think, Wendy, we've often referred groups such as the Klamath Lake and my Southern Oregon Forest and others that have started groups on just such a great example. And I know others have also picked that up around the country. The American Forest Foundation did a case study with Willow Resources to help others around the country also. So just really appreciate their exemplary, but the long-term vision that Nels and Willow Resources has to continue to be part of that community.
Thanks, Julie. Maurizio?
Yes, thank you, Neil. It's always great to be in the room with you. I started the day with Gordon. Thank you. Fantastic presentation. A little depressing for us. I mean, not because you brought the data, but as we saw that slides a couple of times, we went from 65 mills to fewer. And the reasoning for that are even going deeper. It's not just availability of logs, but it's a shifting in working ethics, what people really want from that. So a lot of good. So from being depressed, actually, we've lost 1 million acres of forest land in the last decade. Great. Thank you for a reminder, Jeff. Extremely important. I guess there is hope. And the hope is to really thinking about holistically. And I love the idea, what you said in one of these slides, the most valuable assets we have are the land and its people. I guess that this invitation of the stewardship economy really is to start for what's holding all of us in the same bowl, the same container, the land and its people. And I think that it's a powerful invitation to trying to, through collaborative spirit, to kind of point that direction. There is hope, and we will find a way, and we will do that together. Thank you, Niels, for being here. And thank you all the previous presenters. Fantastic day. I have a lot of questions, not enough time today. What a session, Chair. What a session.
I was interested also in, Niels, what you were saying about the role education plays in this. I've thought about like the Oregon Institute of Technology in Klamath Falls. It seems to me it's kind of easier to diversify where you provide education just because of technology. What are your thoughts on that in terms of formalized, what's the best way to educate people about this?
So I think that's the danger now for me, and the way Willow Resources has grown is I have to talk about a lot of things that I don't know that much details about. But you know, we are working hard now with Eastern Oregon University, Blue Mountain Community College, Treasure Valley Community College, and Eastern Oregon Workforce Board, WorkSource Oregon, to try to figure this out. When Tom Insko was the president of EOU, he and we were both serving on the Board of Forestry. We formed a joint venture between EOU and Willow Resources called the Rural Engagement and Vitality Center, which was basically to make the university a more active participant in economic and community development in Eastern Oregon. And part of that hope was that we would get students actively engaged working on specific projects with companies and getting exposure to the range of work available in our region, particularly around natural resources, and then developing the professional networks that might help them in finding a job when they graduate. And we think that, other research around workforce development around natural resources really talks about needing to start earlier than that, really beginning to expose middle and high school students to these career opportunities and get them excited about it, so they're thinking about it going into college, or to some shorter degree program. More recently, the Forest Service actually provided an investment in Willow Resources to start a forest stewardship workforce crew, because they didn't have enough people to do some basic things they needed to do, including timber sale prep, so boundary marking, boundary layout and tree marking, etc. So we've now hired a bunch of young 20-year-olds and have seasoned professionals working with them, training them to do that work in the field. We mixed it up a little bit so that they're not just painting trees all summer long, that they get to do inventory work. They get to go out and do some wildlife, set up some wildlife monitoring units, and even do some trail work. But I think those sorts of opportunities are really effective. And then the new president of EOU and I have been talking about the model Northeastern has in Boston, where basically every single student getting a degree there has an opportunity to have a job while they are getting their degree, and get that real life exposure and begin to earn wages. And that was part of Tom's vision too, was that if we could begin to form partnerships between, for example, Eastern Oregon University and Boise Cascade or Wood Grain or others, there might be opportunities for those students to begin to get exposure, earn wages, and get excited about careers in forestry.
Really interesting ideas. Thank you so much. And I want to hop to Dave before we have to wrap up this presentation. Dave Bugney.
Thanks. Just a quick thing here. I appreciate everybody's presentations, and I was hoping that maybe what we could do is, if not at our roundtable this afternoon, maybe set aside a time at our next meeting to discuss a synthesis of these three presentations, associated with anything else, because there's a common thread here. I think that we should really discuss more in depth about it, more expansive stewardship, as well as economic development and whatnot. But as part of that, I think that it's just more than just having these presented to us. We should talk about what we can do, whether it's just the CFF or in combination with other organizations like OTFS and OSWA and whatnot, to try to increase the exposure of these things, because I know there's a lot of folks that just are not aware. And so I think if we could just do that to figure out some sort of hierarchical plan would be great, in my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. That has definitely been some really strong presentations with lots to think about, and so much interesting intersection with the issues we talk about regularly on this committee. And it's very forward looking. So thank you. Well, any more questions?
I just had a quick
comment. Go ahead.
Nils. Nils Amanda with Associated Oregon Loggers. Really good to see you on the screen. Just wanted to highlight that Wallowa High School got a CTE revitalization grant for reinitiating their forestry program. And I'm going to be going out there sometime in the fall with Blake Manley, who was pretty engaged in that process, to talk to them about the forest operator industry recognized credential that we're working on with FNRL and Department of Education. It'd be great to see if we can maybe set something up with the partnership to see how they may be able to be involved in getting together and organizing a career development event out in that area, LeGrand, whatnot, because there is no career development events for future natural resource leaders in Eastern Oregon right now. So as we think about how we, move down that path of creating pathways and education, and how do we get folks interested, and recognizing that the John Day Mill situation was primarily a workforce issue. There's plenty of wood and need in Eastern Oregon to get the work done. But I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think this committee as well has been very interested in trying to explore ways to increase that workforce and recognize how that impacts the overall profit of small woodland operations when you don't have mills, or you have really squeezed workforce sector. So that all impacts the ability to get the job done. So and I think everybody out in your area and Mauricio's area know that better than the folks over here, although we see it a lot here too. So I just wanted to highlight that. So I'll reach out to you, Nils, but figured since you're on the screen, I'd make mention.
So Amanda, thanks. And it's got really good to see you and hear that. Dave Duncan down in Wallowa is a longtime friend of ours. And we do have 2 people on our staff now committed to sustaining these partnerships and finding good solutions and good programs for workforce development of the youth here. So when you reach out to me, I'll make sure Blue Rasu and Jacob Losby are connected into that discussion with you, and it'll be great. We would welcome that and be very excited about exploring that with you. I saw Mauricio's hand go up quickly. I just wanted to mention that the Baker Resources Council has a really good high school program too for people working with private forest landowners in Baker County. And when you come out here, we may want to see if you can connect with the Baker School District and that group as well.
Thank you, Neil. So I'll be taking a week off from work, and I'm going to be working with the Baker Resource Coalition kids again this year in the forest. Sometimes it takes some little sweat and heart to do that. And it's a program that's been working now for 5 or 6 years, and with the great support from Wallowa Resources and other partners. So internship in the summer, paid kids, they're learning to be in the woods. I want to go back to Wallowa. We brought our local OSWA chapter in Northeast Oregon to a visit to the Wallowa High School 2 months ago, and I reported that in a previous meeting. No, actually it was February, I don't remember. But sometimes it takes an inspired teacher, David Duncan is in this case, that decided to stop teaching math. He was a math teacher at the high school and started teaching math in a different way, in connecting the kids to the land around it. So he's a former math teacher that is a born again natural resource advocate. And that's a super cool story, because we need those educators. We need to give the breadth and the support to those educators. We want to cultivate long-term this kind of a result.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nils, so much for taking the time to be here today for your very interesting presentation. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks again for the invitation.
Our next item is welcoming Ben Donnelly, because our next item on our agenda is the Board of Forestry update. I want to start by saying, as you can see, we have some presenters here today. You might know Gordon Culbertson, perhaps. You can see you. And then Jake Bryan, Interfor, is a new member of the committee, as you know, from just having voted. And then Jeff Gersh is someone who
We've been on Zoom.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, he just gave us a presentation on his thoughts about succession of ownership of small forest land owners. So I think that we have
for that.
covered news of the room.
Yeah.
And I hand it over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And it's nice to meet you in person and meet you. And so as I was thinking about today and what the board is working on, and what I wanted to sort of talk about, a couple things. For the most part, I'm not going to say things are quiet at the board, but there isn't a lot, with one exception that I'll get to in a moment,
really happening at the board level that I feel like is a direct nexus to CFF right now. So I wanted to, a couple of thoughts, but I want to sort of at some point veer into sort of a conversation of what's hot, what's new, what do we need to be focusing on, thinking about when it comes to family forest owners. But first off, there is one item that's been in front of the board for almost 2 years now, the post-disturbance streamside rules. And a number of the people in this room, that's a very quality time testifying at the last board meeting, and thank you for that. There's a little sort of logistical challenge with that rule set right now, in that it is not currently open for public comments. And so I don't really want to talk about it today. We are reopening our public comments any day now. And for those who were testifying last month or earlier this month, when public comment is reopened, DOJ has assured us that we are going to be allowed to consider comment that was made prior to that, which is nice to hear. So I wanted to sort of flag that is something that directly affects small forest landowners, this post-disturbance streamside rule, and is really important. But because of the rulemaking legal process that we have, I really don't want to talk about that today because I can't take any of the conversation we have today into account until that public comment has been reopened. As I wrestled with that rule and have wrestled with that rule for a long time, does everybody know what I'm talking about with this?
A quick summary would be great.
Great. So this is sort of a holdover from the private forest accord that the original authors were unable to come to an agreement on, that got passed on to the board of the department to take up. And it has to do with the small segment of our forest land base that is the stream side buffer rules post disturbance. So some sort of catastrophic event, usually fire, could be ice, could be wind, could be any number of things. It's a very narrow rule set of those things and how to treat those. With that, as I've wrestled with that particular set of rules, a larger conversation, and Kate, Teresa, and Gordon, you are all privy to an email exchange about this, is when we have rules are here for a reason. Rules are here to make sure that this is sort of an existential crisis thing I'm wrestling with these days. So bear with me, and I'm curious for all of your feedback. We have rules. They're here to ensure that some hopefully best practices that is important to the Commonwealth of Oregon are met, and that folks who might want to take advantage of their landscapes aren't able to take advantage of them in a way that is severely detrimental to the Commonwealth. However, as we go down this work of writing rules, and the state of Oregon has been doing this for 100+ years, this is nothing new, but it's the more carefully you write those rules, the more narrow they are, the more restricted they are. And always, as forest managers, we struggle with this. And especially in 2025, the rapidly changing climate, the recipe of what is the right path forward on any particular patch of forest lands changes, and might be different from one side of your hill to the other side of the hill. And I continue to struggle, and I think everybody continues to struggle with, how do we write rules that achieve that primary focus of ensuring Commonwealth benefits while still allowing leeway for landowners to, well-intentioned landowners, to meet their objectives for themselves and for the forest in a flexible way. And that is something that rears its head over and over and over again with all of the things we talk about here at CFF and at the board and the departments. And with reforestation rules, there are fairly narrow rules that the Forest Practices Act has, and sometimes those don't fit with trying to think about what's going to grow in the future and what are the offsite seeds, what's the assisted migration species that we want to bring in to plants. Are we allowed to do that? Do we have to go through a plan for alternate practice? Do we have to go through a bunch of extra hoops to do that when it really is the right investing to do in the forest? And that's an example. And so, not with the post-disturbance rules in mind, but just sort of bigger picture, this is what I've been wrestling with for a while as I work on the board. And I'm really curious to sort of open this up for discussion among all of you of how you see that tension between those two competing needs to ensure that we still have good, healthy, vibrant forests long into the future in Oregon. Hopefully that's not too existential and broad, but I really like all of you, and I think you're all really smart, and I'm curious to sort of throw that out there to the group of interest.
It's an interesting thought, and the three of us are on the Adaptive Management Program Committee. So in terms of thinking about what rules need to be in the future, that's like very true. We say how prescriptive they should be, how much flexibility should be allowed, how they should be goal directed, and how they should be actual practices directed. We talk about a lot. So I get what you're saying. Now that is not the answer. This is not like an answer. So other thoughts?
Well, speaking strictly, so two thoughts. One, speaking strictly from clothing, if you've ever tried to purchase it for, say, an organization to sell, one size fits all tends to fit almost no one. So that, I mean, and that's kind of a truism.
Right.
And it just, I don't know, Teresa may have thought of it too, but it's like some of my ancient training was in Catholic social thought and Catholic canon law, which is even older than Oregon, to figure out how to manage the behaviors of people. And that really one of the sort of touchstones becomes what's the ideal? And then, so you never stop stating the ideal, but you assume that in order to reach that ideal, you have to assume dispensation from it at times. And it's like, I think that's an age-old existential question in many ways, but sometimes, and I think that becomes one of the big challenges, and I think you guys are facing it in a variety of ways. I'm not going to just step too close to the line. In a variety of ways, how do you keep something from becoming actually counterproductive and creating exactly the degradation you are trying to avoid by sticking too closely to a rule? That a rule isn't an ideal, and a forest isn't a rule. A forest is a forest. It's a living, breathing organism. And rules tend not to be living, breathing. I mean, they have a life of their own, as it were. But yeah, it's like a piece of paper and a forest aren't always the same thing. So, but I'm actually delighted to hear you're wrestling with that, because that I think is incredibly important to all of us, that wrestling actually happens, and that perhaps that wrestling can become transformative and open up a way forward that does keep people from taking advantage, but at the same time allows the other people who really just want to do the best thing for their forest to do the best thing for their forest.
Yeah. When I think I appreciate that, and the sort of, I think you said at the beginning, that sort of the ideal, like if you can sort of frame that up. And I think that, with our vision document that we put together, I think that was really, I saw that as trying to sort of set this out there as this is what we want our forest to look like. This is how we want to operate at a 50,000 or 100,000 foot level. On some level, maybe that's enough. If everybody managing their forest can draw a line to the vision document saying we are doing this work to achieve those ends, in this world that is not enough, but that hopefully can be a piece of that puzzle. And how do you then create these subsidiary actions that always drive with those desired future conditions, or the sort of the North Star?
As a pro rule statement, I would say, as a lawyer, I've worked a lot on compliance work, and to a certain extent, it creates an even playing field.
Right.
If you are advising a company that is thinking, where is the point that I can land that is not excessively exploitative, that's best practices, sometimes the rule coincides with that level of compliance. So it can be useful in that way. And I think that traditional ways of dealing with some of the gray area we've been mentioning is sometimes to provide, like in the private forestry code, having alternatives for practices for smaller landowners. It's a typical way where you accept that there's some gray area, but there are also different categories with different needs, and small forest landowners are one of those. So I think, like in the Accord, you see a way of having, it's getting down to the rule level, but even from the initial agreement and then the statute down to the rules, there's special rules and alternatives and options, and quite a few of them actually for small forest landowners combined with support. So I see that as somewhat of the typical and often a successful way of dealing with people's different situations, recognizing that there will always be some tension when there are rules in place. And when you mentioned the vision, I think that's another thing that, because we're hoping we'll come back to CFF, at least I am, when the broader vision starts being implemented in things. And I gather that the department's doing most of that work, but we hope that we'll have a voice about some.
I have a little update on that
Okay,
at some
sorry,
point.
jump
No,
in.
no, I didn't actually think about that just now, but I do have a little update on that. Well, and I guess I want to make sure I'm also fairly pro rule. Like I'm not, I don't know that I'm sitting here saying these rules are not good, but.
Well, no, I wasn't saying you were, but it's so easy to get frustrated with rules because it's kind of like, you want to raise your child well, but do you want a detailed list of exactly how to do it? Probably not. So rules can be frustrating, but I just want to point out that they can be helpful from a compliance perspective, but a good rule creates some clarity and also make sure that the most exploitative end of practice doesn't end up being the industry norm. You can lay a rule where it provides clarity and also allows people to engage in best practice.
The private forest support example is an interesting one where the small forest landowner options.
Yes.
And there's an inordinate amount of pages addressing that. And I'm looking at Mike over here who's smiling inside about all the work that went into that. And with great intentions. I'm unsure how many people are taking advantage of that.
That is true.
And that's where I think I struggle of did we hit the mark? Is I think the intentions were good and it makes sense on the face, but is it working? Or is it more straitjackets in other places that continue to keep things? It's the rule challenge. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Dave.
I've been patient, so so I think just briefly here, I mean, when I listen to all this, it seems to me, there are rules that apply for broad, expansive things. Good deal. And then there are rules that apply to very narrow things. And this post-disturbance, in my view, is a very narrow, low probability, but high impact sort of event. And so, and they're rarely ever the same. And for small woodland owners, they can adversely affect all or a huge percentage of what they own compared to, say, industrial forest landowner. So it seems to me, and my biggest concern about all this is that there should be given more flexibility to interpret conditions and what the, more of a performance-based prescription versus a prescriptive-based prescription in order to achieve, a desired future condition based on what's there. And ODF has a great repository of trained professionals to work with the small woodland owners to achieve those goals. So I think that should be, not just in the post-harvest disturbance stuff, but anything that's like this, I think it should take advantage of those sorts of assets that ODF has to help the small woodland owner to achieve their goals, but realize how adversely impacted they are more than industrial forest land owners in many cases. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. I really appreciate the performance-based versus prescriptive-based framing of that. That's the performance-based is harder to adjudicate, but gives more flexibility.
And maybe it brings us back to that sort of partnership model a bit more, who are those trusted partners? I mean, the department's trusted, but it's like, and how do you make sure how do you sustain that trust? And maybe, yes, more cooks in the kitchen. I mean, that's back to the Catholic one. Thomas Aquinas, I think, was the do good, avoid evil. We can kind of agree. It gets muddier as soon as you legislate from it. But if we have more trusted partners together, it's like, and it's about that forging relationships and, being able to work with someone, not as it's like if you get to work with your stewardship forester, less as a regulatory voice and more as a partner thinking something out, I bet you get better performance models and everybody's happier, and fewer weapons get drawn, whether literal or verbal, if we're partners. And maybe sometimes that means you've got, we've talked about it before, a master woodland manager, neighbor friend, or your extension forester, or you bring a few more voices around to have the conversations and do the brainstorming. But if your North Star, the finger you're always pointing toward, is those real desired future conditions of resilient, healthy forests that I think we all want. I mean, Steve Cafferata has repeated 1,000 times in my hearing that he has never met a small woodland owner that wanted an unhealthy forest.
Right.
So if we assume that, it's like assuming goodwill, I think, can carry us a long ways. Yeah, until someone proves it otherwise. I mean, yes, there are bad actors out there in everything.
Yeah.
But there are also an awful lot of really good, solid boots on the ground, blood, sweat, and tears poured on the landscape.
We just need to give Mike the authority to adjudicate who's a good and a bad actor.
Yeah. He'll have even less, like hair will start disappearing. Yeah, thanks. Julie.
Thanks. I don't want to totally change the subject, but before, Ben, if you're on a tight time frame, I just wondering if you could also, today our group's going to start thinking about our annual report and our presentation that will come later this year to the board, and you've been a good bridge between the two groups. If you have any thoughts on things that you think would be important for our group to highlight and would be of use for this group to think about as we put together the report and thinking of what we're going to come communicate to the board.
Absolutely.
Can I just comment, follow up from
Please.
what
I'll put a
Kate
pin in
was
that
saying.
one.
Sorry, Julie, but just to follow up on what Kate was saying, I think by and large, as a forest sector, inclusive of all of the pieces, we all rely on each other. And that's part of our conversation today has been how does one part affect the other, whether it's having enough mills, having enough loggers, and what affects those things, which also affect the ability for small landowners to get a profit and manage their land, right, effectively and efficiently. And so I think that goodwill, I always get really frustrated representing foresters and loggers in different capacities, this continued villainization of the sector in all the different parts. And, as a forester, and many foresters, wherever you've landed in your career, most of us came from the same place, some type of community college or university setting. We all got the same education. We just ended up in different places. Loggers may be a different pathway there, but from their community, managing their community, all of us have the best, a vested interest in having well-maintained, healthy forests. And when, I get really frustrated when people tell me why I do what I do. And that happens all the time. And I'm sure that happens to you as well as as a landowner and, a business owner and manager as well. And so I think just to carry that forward beyond sort of this committee's focus, but in the context of our conversation throughout today, which unfortunately you missed our earlier conversations, but
it looked like a fantastic morning.
but I just want to carry that forward, to its rightful end, right, as a sector as whole. So it's like, I think that a lot of the concern comes from, can we trust large industrial to make a good decision on their land? Can we trust loggers to make a good decision? Can we trust small landowners to make a good decision? So.
Well, I think trust is an important one, and it goes not both ways, always.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd like to make a comment about that. I've been working with stewardship foresters for a really long time. And I have found them to be an honorable group that are really interested in good results.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm afraid that I see eroding is the traditional relationship that we've had that allowed for alternate plans to meet the results that I think everybody agrees with are good results. And I would caution that rather than for us to draft the rules so we can make sure that whoever is a bad actor doesn't do something bad, because we already have those rules right there. If someone is in violation of the Forest Practices Act, there's a very clear path for them. But I want to make sure that we don't punish people that are trying to do the right thing and need alternative prescriptions for the sake of making sure that somebody doesn't get away with something when the vast majority of people are trying to do the right thing for their property. And as Dave so eloquently said, that particularly with small woodland owners, we live on and recreate and spend a lot of time on that property. And the last thing that any small woodland owner that I know wants to do is mess it up.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I think you bring up a very good point. And I think in the rules world, I think often plan for alternate practices are seen as sometimes a signifier of something not working. And I think, I know at ODF, like if there's enough applications for a plan for alternate practice for a particular rule set, that's a trigger to maybe review the rule sets. And but I'm thinking that maybe there's a way to sort of flip that narrative that's, well, a plan for alternate practice with a good team of stewardship foresters, administering those is a real strength that this state has. And that's right. That's a great point.
That's well said, Ben. That is a strength.
It is.
I think
it can be, and I think it is always, but it can be. And
pretty much always. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Say, Mike? Okay.
Julie had such a good point.
Yes, I want to get to that.
Thanks.
So thank you for this conversation, for indulging my showing up here with big lofty questions and ideas and not specifics, which might be more helpful, but I appreciate you all. So for your annual reports, which is coming up, when is that? Is that September?
So we'll be working on it over the next few months.
I think it's always, I think some of the stuff we talked about today, I think is really valuable for the whole board to hear. And I think it's really helpful to always talk about the usual suspects that I feel like are always met. Workforce, seat availability, funding, fire, resources, those things that I think it's good to continue to sort of put those top of minds. But I think this conversation about flexibility and small woodland owners. I like, I don't 100% agree with Mike Caffaretta's line of, every small woodland owner wants a healthy forest. That is true. I got some neighbors who are out of state owners who do some pretty horrible things to their landscape. So it's not 100% true, but I think for,
He talked to.
and I would agree as well. The people I know who are actually caring and managing the forest, yes, they truly deeply care about maintaining a healthy and vibrant forest landscape. And so, yeah, anchoring into that trust portion of this is a valuable and trustworthy and well-educated group of landowners by and large, I think is important to hear.
How about, because I always like putting in the report some forward-looking things in terms of ways we can be of use.
Yeah.
We're an advisory
Yes.
committee and we need
Yes.
to be providing input. And like I said, the build out of the whatever rules, et cetera, support the mission. That's one thing.
Yeah.
The vision.
Yeah.
That's one thing I thought of. Is that a good thing to put in our report, how we would like to support the board on that? Are there any specifics?
I
you can
think,
put?
I mean, wherever you
Yeah.
can say, we would like to be more involved in these areas is good to hear, because unless you shout it from the rooftops, it's not gonna happen. So that, and I think with the vision in particular, yeah, that you are a key partner in distributing that as the department starts to distribute that CFF is a conduit, and wants to and should be involved in that. So, very much.
Do other people like on the committee want to, like, you want to bounce by Ben in terms of thinking, oh, this is where we think it could be helpful?
Kayla has her hand.
Oh, Kayla.
Oh, thanks, Wendy. That's exactly the question I wanted to respond to. I really appreciate this conversation around, both the nuance in rule and outcomes, and also about trust and messengers. I think it is, you guys are totally on point with my feelings about the heart of a lot of these issues. And I think there's always this, or at least on the conservation sort of environmental side, that's pushing for one standard approach often because of, sort of fear around a bad outcome and a bad actor. I mean, that's just the way that our system has been shaped. I think there's often a real gap still around exposure and implementation in the field. I think, on the industrial side and maybe on the small forest owner side, there's obviously more experience in the field and what it actually looks like to implement these rules. You guys are living it and breathing it, and you know what the challenges are to meeting a specific standard and why you need some flexibility. But there's just that long history of mistrust. So long way of saying, I think one of the specific ways this group and the community of small forest owners could support rule development so that it, kind of maybe has some of that more nuanced information or goals would be with more field trips. I just think, I know that that's not something that's easy to do. I feel like it is always the most compelling thing, though, getting, not just the board, but the folks who are at the board meetings who are advocating for, specific rules, the rulemaking committees, I guess maybe would be the group to get out on land and to show them, like, okay, let's talk about this, this draft rule. How does this look in practice? Not with a picture, not with a description of the challenge, but like really being there with the loggers and with the the operators. I think I've just been guilty of being on that side for a long time, of really not understanding the difference of practice. And it's been helpful for me. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, and I thank you for saying that. And okay, you offered many times for us to come to your place. And honestly, if you wanted to sort of put this together in your report and say, we are ready and prepared to host the board for a day-long tour of small Forestlands, that would be powerful. And we should. I have asked for that a number of times, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It hasn't fit yet, but I think it's long since overdue that the board is steward small women's Forestlands. I'd be a strong advocate for that if, and I think, to me, a good tour includes the good, the bad, and the ugly. It includes, so often people on their tours want to just show up all the really wonderful things that we're proud of. But I think